Hello and welcome to the My Fundraising College podcast. In this episode, we are interviewing Dr. Beth Breeze from the University of Kent's Centre of Philanthropy. Beth has a fascinating story. She was a fundraiser in practice, working at a charity, and then she made the transition to become a university researcher, studying fundraisers and philanthropists. And one of the great things is that she's dedicated her career to getting academic knowledge into practice. Beth has so many wonderful insights to share with us, so we really hope that you enjoyed this episode. Hello, Beth. Thank you so much for joining us on the My Fundraising College podcast. To kick us off, your journey has always fascinated me because you was a fundraiser working in a charity that then made the switch to academic research, but presumably there was a little bit of a journey before that where you were starting to do some reading when you was in practice. So what made you think you needed to learn the theory behind your job?
Oh, well, delighted to be here, Stuart. Thanks very much for asking me. And yeah, you're right. There's definitely a longer journey behind, for all of us, where we've got to today. And I'd probably date it right back to being a kid and being the kind of kid who got involved in fundraising without knowing it was called fundraising or any of that sort of language. I just liked helping. I liked talking to people. I found I was good at it. Then went to college, university, sort of got involved in fundraising. And yeah, just found myself, one of those kind of accidental fundraisers who fell into it. But then once I was doing it, I was thinking, well, why did that work and not that work? And why did they give and not those give? And even though they've got similar wealth levels or seem to have similar levels of interest in the cause, or why did that event go really well and that event not go so well? So I just had loads of questions basically, and that's it. So it felt actually a more natural shift from doing fundraising to studying fundraising, because I was really answering the questions that I had myself. And then of course, as time went on, I realized that lots of people who fall into fundraising have very similar questions. So it's been lovely to find that it's quite a collective journey actually, and a lot of us share a fascination in trying to better understand how asking works and how giving works.
No, absolutely, because we're quite a curious bunch, aren't we, fundraisers, which I think is what brings us into the job because we like people and we like to understand their story. So in those early days, particularly before you started studying your MA, what sorts of things did you do to start learning about fundraising and philanthropy?
So I can really clearly remember being on the train to my first job. At that point, I was living in Edinburgh, and I applied for a fundraising job in London with the Cardinal Hume Centre, which is a charity that helps young homeless people. And I literally sat on the train from Edinburgh to London reading a sort of idiot's guide to fundraising, and absorbed all this information and then kind of regurgitated it in the interview. And who knows whether that helps or didn't help, but I was clearly passionate about doing it and had a bit of volunteer experience. But that's all I brought really to that first job was passion, enthusiasm, volunteering, and 4 hours of reading this book. So once I got the job, and thank goodness they took a chance on me, and I'm still in touch with that charity. I'm involved in Catholics in fundraising, and I see the colleagues who work there now, and they. But I also, once I got the job, tried to find other books. I guess I've just always gravitated to, there's information in books. Somebody's taken the trouble to write it down, so you might as well benefit from that. They've taken a couple of years to write it. I can read it in a train journey or in a few lunchtimes, so why not? And I think the book that most stands out is, I remember reading Ken Burnett's Relationship Fundraising, and this would be the first edition. This would be the early 1990s one. He reproduced it in 2002, I think. And I used to sit there at lunchtime, and I'm quite a creature of habits. I'd have the same sandwich and the same ginger beer drink and ginger ale, and I'd sit and turn over the pages. And those drinks and flavors still bring me back to Ken's writing and that lovely big hardback book, which I've still got a copy of. And I think it's just that sense of learning from people who've been there and who are kind enough to share their insights. And every fundraiser is different, every ask is different, but you can always learn something from people who've gone before you. So I think, I'm a bit of a sponge, absorbing anything that people write or say about fundraising.
Oh gosh, that resonates with me so much. I don't know about you. I quickly started with those experiential ones like Ken Burner, and then got to the point where I was like, oh, I wish there was kind of a bit more science behind this. And that's when I discovered Sargent and Jay's fundraising management book, and then I was like, oh, there's a lot more going on here. Did you have a
Yeah.
similar experience?
No, I think you probably moved a bit faster than I did. I think I read Ken's book and I talked to a lot of people. I wish there'd been things like Sophie, the showcase of fundraising, innovation, and inspiration. I think that's a wonderful resource because I think we have to be realistic that people don't have the time or the capacity to read like lengthy tomes. Anything you can do in kind of bite-sized chunks. I think Sophie is a very good. You can just jump online in your lunch break or coffee break and have a look at an exhibit of a direct mail campaign that works or a legacy campaign that works. So I love that kind of bite-sized approach, and that's one of the reasons for the fundraising reader, within which we've got Ken Burnett's an extract from his work. So people, with 5 minutes to spare, you can capture the essence of what these ideas are. But no, I don't think I moved as fast as you. I did the fundraising for a good few years, and then maybe 5 or 6 years later did a master's degree whilst working in London in different non-profits. And that's when I first encountered Adrian's work and Helmut Anheier and other people, and that was a bit of a baptism of fire. 2 years part-time masters, and loved it. So no, I was a bit more kind of practical, sleeves rolled up before I got into the theory.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that brings me on to my next question, because it seems now that there's a lot more resources available. If you're at that early stage and you're looking to start exploring a bit more about fundraising and philanthropy, if there was anyone listening that wanted to begin learning more about the sector, could you recommend a few books or resources you start with? You've obviously mentioned Sophie. Are there any others that you think are a good starting?
Yeah. No, I think I recognize what you're describing. There is a lot more now, but that has its own problem because when there's almost nothing, like you and I, we read Ken Burnett because there wasn't really anything else to read. And that makes life simpler in a way. But then suddenly if there's an awful lot of material, it's that information overload problem, isn't it? You don't really know where to begin. And so I think that we needed to curate that a bit and help signpost people to, maybe the more robust material or the more well-regarded material, because some of it's a matter of opinion. We shouldn't kid ourselves that it's a pure science. We're not studying atoms and rocks here. We're studying people, and we're thinking about the social act of giving and all that involves. So but there are pieces of work that are more widely regarded as useful. So I think I would point people to the curated entry points. So Sophie for sure. So if people don't know that, sofii.org. And it's a wonderful, in fact, Ken's behind that. So he helped to set that up, and it's now on its own 2 feet with staff, and it's great. Basically fundraisers sharing what worked for them and narrating. So here's this great campaign, but here's really what happened behind the scenes.
Yes.
And then, without wishing to sound too self-interested, the fundraising reader, which I've just edited, and it came out in May. Oh, thank you very much for waving that. And that's got 88 extracts from all kinds of different texts. So sometimes full-length books, sometimes academic articles, sometimes blogs, newspaper pieces, and we've tried to find, to give people a taste of the thinking behind fundraising. So the sections on like what is fundraising, what are the fundamental skills, what's the theory, what are the ethical issues. There's a whole section on that because I think that really matters to everybody. Being a fundraiser, what's it like, to actually be the one out there doing the asking. So, I am proud of that book, and it's the book I wish I'd had. If I'd had that, in my early days, I think I would have moved a bit faster. And then from that, say, okay, I want to read more about this. Then go get the full length book behind it, or the full length article, or what have you. But they're two good entry points.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And one of the great things on Sophie is they have I think they call it the almost complete fundraisers bookshelf. And they've curated a list of, like, if you're going to buy 20 or so books on fundraising, this is what we recommend. And it's kind of compiled by a number of seasoned fundraisers. The other thing I absolutely love about this reader is one of the challenges I had, and probably triggered me to come and study under you at for the MA in Philanthropic Studies, was you start looking into this stuff, and so much good stuff out there is either behind paywalls or it's a little bit dated, so it's gone up to like 60-70 pounds to get a copy of it on Amazon. And I just love the fact that all those key things are in this little treasure trove. The other couple of things I did before coming on to the MA, which was really helpful, was you guys do a MA in a day on your website. You've kindly put on a few lectures on there and a few free articles that you can download. And I had a go at the fundraising for non-fundraisers. I'm not too sure if you still do that,
Yeah,
but
we still do that. Yeah.
again, just anything where you can grab those free curated resources is just super helpful.
Yeah, so the fundraising for non-fundraisers is a MOOC, which is one of those acronyms that MOOC stands for Multi Online Open Course. And it's hosted on a platform called FutureLearn. There are, a couple of fundraising ones, and one of them is one that we've done at the University of Kent. And it's we say it's a 3-week, 12-hour course. Of course, people could sit down in one day and just work through the whole thing if they want, but we suggest you kind of pace it out over 3 weeks and do 4 hours a week, and each week's got about 12 steps in it. And a step would be maybe a 5-minute video of me explaining about, say, major donor fundraising, and then a little bit of writing, and then a comment board at the bottom where you can interact with all the other people who are doing the course. And I think about 10,000 people have taken it so far all over the world. And people introduce themselves and they comment on the content, and they'll say, oh, I need to know a bit more about this, or what do other people think. So it's part course and it's part kind of mutual aid, which fundraisers are brilliant at. It's one of the reasons I love this world. I could not work in a world where people hold information to themselves. Like, I've got the secret to how to make money and I'm not telling you. I couldn't deal with it. But thank you for what you said about the reader. That is exactly what we wanted it to be. A way of getting down, getting behind those paywalls, because, sometimes people go to a conference or they're on a course and they say, oh, read this. And then you try to read it and you can't. And I shared that frustration, and I wanted to help tackle it. And it's really important to say that did actually cost some amount of money. We had a budget of about £25,000 to pay for the licenses, because obviously we can't just print stuff. We had to get the copyright permission, and Pears Foundation provided the money to do that. And Pears Foundation, they are it's a London-based grant-making foundation which works with a whole range of different causes, health and ecumenicalism and all kinds of issues, but they have a strand of work which is around philanthropy and fundraising, and we're very, very lucky to be a partner within that strand of their work.
So you touched on this a little bit before. Fundraisers are incredibly busy people. It's just not a 9-to-5 job. Is one of the things I love about it. It's a bit of a vocation. In a good way, you are probably one of the busiest people I've ever met, and yet also one of the most well-read in the fields of philanthropy and fundraising. And I know that you're kind of employed as a lecturer, and so that comes with that. So I'd be really interested to hear, with all this information that's constantly coming at us, what habits or practices do you have to make sure you're carving out time to keep abreast of everything that's happening in our sector?
Yeah, you're right. My job is to think and talk and write and read about fundraising. So what a brilliant, job that is to get to do. And because I genuinely find it endlessly fascinating, it never feels like work. So I am one of those people who does tend to bring workbooks on to the beach with me, because it's fun, it's interesting. So I can't claim to be someone who's got brilliant boundaries. I don't have great boundaries. But if you can find what fascinates you and what you think is important and turn that into a job, which is what often a lot of people in the charity sector have done, then I don't think you quite feel like, oh, it's 5 o'clock, I'm going to put this book down now. You're like, oh, you want to get to the end of it and keep reading it. So there's an element of that, of probably not having great boundaries, but that's okay because I love it and I find it fascinating. There's also an element of skim reading, speed reading. I've been taught by people how to, it can take a long time to read a book if you read every single word of it, but actually you can get the gist of it if you read the blurb on the back, if you read carefully the introduction and conclusion. The bit in the middle is really just deepening the argument and giving lots of examples and cases. So when I write my books, I make sure the whole book, you can understand the whole book by reading the introduction and the conclusion, which actually is a lot shorter than reading everything in between. And also speaking to other people, what's worth reading, what's going and listening to them give a talk. A lot of people, when they've published a book, will do webinars. So if you tune in and listen to someone talk for 50 minutes, you can get the gist of the book, and then you can decide, okay, yeah, I do want to read all of that.
Yes, yeah. But I really like what you said about not feeling obliged to read the entirety of the book, because this is something we tell our team. We run an internal book club, which you've very kindly been part of in the past. And we keep saying to people, look, you don't serve the books serve you. If you get to a chapter and sometimes within the first paragraph you're like, oh, I've got the gist of that, or I already kind of know that, move on to the next chapter. Like, there's no prizes for reading every single word in every book.
The other thing though is, and I don't want to sound, obviously I'm in a university, I think books are brilliant, but there's a lot of other ways that fundraisers learn, and one of them is just
Yeah,
talking to the fundraisers. And you probably would have come onto this, but I do want to say this at this point anyway, that I've learned a lot just by asking people, tell me about how you got into fundraising, tell me what you wish you'd known at the start, give me some advice. And I love doing that. And I think fundraisers are incredibly generous with sharing their experiences. And it's I often think of it as quite a creative profession. Fundraising is not a science, it's an art. And it's creative in the sense like a great chef or an architect or a musician. Each day we're trying to find new ways to present the need,
yeah,
to find people who are interested in it, and explain to them, to story tell what the need is, and to show them how they can help, what the call to action is, I suppose, to use the jargon. So we're always trying to find new and interesting ways to do that, because people have got total information overload. There's so many things out there that they're interested in and that they could be helping with. So a book I wrote a few years ago called The New Fundraisers, I start with a story of the busy fundraiser,
yeah.
because fundraisers are busy. You kind of said I'm busy, but everyone's busy. How you prioritize, how you make time in your day, how you respond quickly to opportunities that come to you. If you think about some of the best fundraising successes recently, it's tended to be because people have acted quickly. They've not said, "Oh, it's not in our strategy. I wasn't planning to do that this week." Something's happened in the news, or I think of like no makeup selfies a few years ago. I don't know if people remember that. It was a kind of a little thing and Cancer Research UK just grabbed it and said, right, we're going to make this work. And they, it was all credit to their digital fundraising team that they just ran with it and helped people see, the reaction. And the same with any of those big fundraising campaigns that take off. So yeah, I think one of the best things you can do is talk to people about what they did. And just to share with you that story that starts The New Fundraisers,
Yes, I love this story.
well, I was in Australia, which is another good perk of being an academic, is you can visit other centres. So I was visiting the Australian Centre on Philanthropy, and I met this man who had been awarded Fundraiser of the Year. And so, of course, you say, well done, congratulations. Tell me about yourself. What is it? What do you do that makes you such a standout fundraiser? And he told me about a day when he, like most of his days, absolutely full diary, meetings, things he had to do, deadlines, and what have you. And he walked into the office, and the receptionist said to him, look, there's a lady in reception asking for you. She wants to make a donation. I know you're busy. I can see you've got meetings from 9 onwards. What do I do?
Yeah,
And what he did was he cleared a bit of his diary. He got some tea and biscuits delivered to a private room, and said to the lady, come and meet me. In there, and he sat with her, and what had happened was her husband had recently died, and she wanted to make a donation to the charity. Now, I think a less good fundraiser would have just said, great, that's wonderful, how much, sign here, and send her on the way so he could get on with his
yeah.
meetings. But he didn't do that. His response when she said that her husband had died and that she wanted to make a donation in his name was to say, tell me about your husband.
Yes.
And that was such a wonderful question to ask. And it shows that curiosity that fundraisers have. I want to know about him.
Yeah.
And of course, and she was delighted because she wanted to talk about him.
Yes.
She just lost, her lifetime partner. And actually, in the process of her telling him about her husband and what kind of man he was, and why this, led to a donation, he then got all the information he needed about what kind of project they could, how much to ask for, because she was able to, to say, we've given 10,000 to this, or oh, okay, that gives you an idea. And so it was actually quite, pragmatically useful as well. But it was morally the right thing to do, to make
Absolutely.
time for this woman. And it ended up being a wonderful relationship where she gave, and she ended up leaving a legacy when she died. So that's a good example to me of what a good fundraiser is. Someone who can quickly pivot, can be very human with the
Yeah.
person who's in front of them, can think practically, because of course you're trying to raise funds for your cause, and a good outcome for everybody, a good outcome for the donor, but a good outcome for the charity as well. So to me, that's what fundraising is about.
Absolutely. And I think because obviously fundraising gets its criticism, and yet my experience is fundraising done well is such a beautiful thing for the donor. The amount of times I had gone on meetings and afterwards I'd be thanking the person for their time, and they'd be going, no, I've really enjoyed this last half an hour.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree more. I mean, fundraising done badly is depleting, and we have to acknowledge that.
Yeah.
it can be done badly. It can make people feel like they're just a walking cash machine and that no one cared about them as a person. They just wanted their money. So for sure that happens. But fundraising done well is absolutely life enriching
Yeah.
because it's a conversation about your values, like what
Yes.
kind of world do you want there to be? And it's not really about the money. It's about the how you see the world and what contribution you want to make. And I think it can be a really energizing and yeah. And sometimes I've heard donors say they gave me the chance to do the best thing I've ever done.
Yes.
That fundraiser created this opportunity for me to do something really mean that I'm really proud of, really
Yeah.
meaningful, and I've met all these interesting people, and I feel like I've done something good. And I think it's really important that when we say you've got a right to ask and proud to fundraise, that's what we're talking about. We're talking about not funding good work that needs doing, and
Yeah.
also giving people who've got resources the chance to put them to good use.
Yeah.
Because those resources exist anyway, and they're going to spend it on something, or it's going to sit in the bank, or it's going to get handed on to the next generation. There's only a limited number of things you can do with money. And we know as fundraisers, one of the best things they can do with money is give it to good causes who can
Yes.
then put it to good use. And that role that fundraisers play mediating that, it doesn't just happen by accident. And I
Mm.
think if anyone who isn't a fundraiser, who maybe works with fundraisers or is on a board and doesn't understand the skill that goes into
Yeah.
making those transactions happen, a good fundraiser is quite invisible. We want to foreground the donor. We want them to feel ownership of it. But actually there's a lot of work goes on behind the scenes. So yeah, no, fundraising is magical when it's done well, and it can definitely change the donor's life for the better as well as the end beneficiaries.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I'm glad you mentioned the new, but this is my favorite book. I've read this now
Oh.
3 times. I just adore this book. One of the things that always stands out to me though is
Yeah.
the majority of fundraisers have to learn on the job how to practice their profession.
Mhm.
Having met so many fundraisers through this and through your day job with students all the time, what's your reflections on that? Is that a good thing, or should we be encouraging more people to formally study fundraising? What's the balance between, being trained and also just getting on with it and experiencing it for yourself?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it is a bit of both. I think there is definitely a knowledge base, and it's a growing knowledge base, as we've talked about. And it would be a shame not to learn from that. If somebody spent 3 years of their life studying whether gala dinners work, and they've condensed it into an article, published it, maybe it was their PhD, why not read that? It's 10 pages and you're going to learn something. So I think we should definitely be aware of the research and the literature that's out there. But I think also fundraising is a thing we do. It's not just a thing we study and talk about. It's not just an abstract theoretical thing. It's a very practical thing. And somebody once said to me, it's a bit like trying to learn swimming without getting into the pool. You've just got to get in. You can sit in the classroom where we can talk about flotation and stroke and breathing techniques for swimming,
Yeah.
but you've just got to get in the pool and do it and have a go and learn as you go along. And I think fundraising is definitely a skill like that, where you have to dive in literally and metaphorically. I'm a big fan of role play and practicing with colleagues. I'm going to a meeting, can I just sit and practice my pitch to you? Can I practice making an ask? Because you don't want to be making those mistakes in the real life scenario. And if you think, there's a lot of professions like that. I mean, when people learn to fly a plane,
Yeah.
they go into a flight simulator.
Yeah.
When you're learning to do surgery, you practice on sort of a simulated body. So I think fundraising, similarly, we can practice we can practice it in a real life type scenario, but without risking making a bad ask to somebody that really could change the fortunes of our charity for good.
Absolutely. And one thing, because some people listening to this might be in a small shop where the sole fundraiser in their organization. So if you haven't got a natural colleague that you can do that role play, really recommend that you get a mentor. There's paid mentors out there, but also there's loads of schemes now. So IDPE, when I was starting the profession, got me a free mentor. Chartered Institute of Fundraising do it. Tony Elisha Foundation have a brilliant scheme where they pair
Yeah.
you up with a mentor. So, and I know we're name dropping a lot of things in this podcast, but I'll make sure I kind of put a library of all this in the comments below. But do grab yourself a mentor,
Yeah.
because you could role play with them if you've not got a colleague.
I agree, and they're all really good links, and these are brilliant resources. but equally, I wouldn't delay. I wouldn't think, oh, until I get a mentor, I can't do this. Yeah. Worst case scenario, stand in front of a mirror and ask yourself, and you'll know, because it's partly about practicing how fluent you are. And you'll realize you dry up. Hang on a minute. I can't explain exactly what this project is, or, you can practice yourself. What kind of questions might they ask? Well, what's the impact of this work? Oh, I better go and do some research and make sure I've got a good answer to that. So, I think, worst case scenario, you stand in front of a mirror or ask a loved one or a friend who's not a fundraising mentor, but is just a human being who can tell you, do you know what, you sounded a bit preachy when you said that, or that was a bit long-winded, or it wasn't very clear. Get someone who'll be honest with you, and you will not regret that time that you spend finessing. You don't want to sound too smooth. We're not double glazing salespeople. We're not trying to, but you want to be fluent, and you want to be passionate, and you want to be clear.
Yeah, yeah. And you can see in their body language. I mean, I used to practice, well, I still do for certain things with my wife. And I know as soon as the glazed expression
Yeah.
comes, yeah, that's where I went wrong. And
Yeah.
often the answer is,
Arms like this. If they do this, they're not. You've not what you want them to, arms out and leaning into you. Then you've got to be good at reading body language. Absolutely.
yeah, and normally the solution is telling a story, because if you've got a sort of armory of great stories from your organization, that can just draw people back into that conversation, because we're a
Yeah.
social animal and we like to hear what other people have done and their experiences.
Yeah,
Um,
but also, going back to that point about being a good listener, I think that, when sometimes the language we use isn't very helpful. I'm going to do an ask meeting, I'm going to make a pitch. It sounds very much like I'm going to transmit information to this poor person who's sitting at the other side of the table. It's not that. It's a conversation, and it's a conversation in which we should probably do more listening than talking. We do, when they say, okay, what is it you want? You do want to have a very clear, fluent, passionate, statement to make. But up until that point, you're really hoping they'll tell you more about why they've willing to have this conversation, what's their interest. So the more we can ask them about what brings you to here, or how did you first get involved. I remember that was one of the really good bits of advice I got when I did essentially my apprenticeship in that first job at the Cardinal Hume Centre. There was only two of us in the team, Robert Johnson and myself, and he was the director of fundraising and I was his fundraising officer. And one of his bits of advice was, when you've got someone who's been on the database for a while but hasn't given in a while, if you can have a conversation with them and say, oh, it was wonderful that you donated to us 5 years ago, 10 years ago, or came to our event 3 years ago, whatever it was. I'd love to know what prompted that, what brought you on to that. And suddenly you're taking them back to their original enthusiasm. One time I got invited to visit the lifeboats, the RNLI headquarters in Poole. And I was there because I was friends with the director of fundraising in the lifeboats, and she wanted me to present research to her team, and I was very happy to do that. But before the team meeting, she gave me a tour of the building.
yeah,
And I realized halfway through the tour that people in the building thought I was a donor. Because why would they think I'm an academic who studies fundraising? I was being shown around the building by the head of fundraising, and I was probably I'm not a very smartly dressed person, but I was probably, wearing a suit because and I suddenly realized that they thought I was, a person of wealth who might make a big donation. And everybody talked at me. Whatever room I went into, there was these not so subtle, oh, this equipment's a little bit dated, and oh gosh, it would be so wonderful if we had some money for this. And I thought it was a real eye-opener for me of, this is what it must be like to be a rich person visiting a charity. And everyone's just talking at me and nobody's asking me who I am and what I'm interested in. And actually, I had been involved in the lifeboats. When I was at college, we ran a lifeboat station. And
right.
what I really wanted to know was, how's my lifeboat station doing? Have you had any call outs recently? Have they
Yeah.
had a new boat recently? But no, but I didn't get the chance to ask. And if I had been a donor, and hadn't had the chance to say, actually, I'm really interested in this one particular station in South Wales and how are they doing, I'd have left that building feeling depleted, not energized. Also, another story to share with you is on that point about listening. I interviewed for the fundraisers book, the new fundraisers book. I interviewed somebody who was, to my mind, a very good
Mm.
director of fundraising, and she had to recruit a lot of people. And I said, how do you know who's going to be a good fundraiser? I asked this of quite a few people I interviewed, but she gave the best answer. She said that during the interview, for when she's trying to recruit a new fundraiser, she sets the hedgehog test. And of course I said, well, what on earth's a hedgehog test?
Yeah.
Yeah, tell me that. And what she meant was that at some point in the interview, when the interviewee is talking very passionately about how much they love hedgehogs or skiing or reading or going to the cinema, whatever it is they love doing, she disagrees with them, and she says, oh, I think hedgehogs are awful. I think they're, a pest and we should, exterminate them. Or I think going to the cinema is a waste of time, or, whatever it was that they were being really passionate about, she would disagree. And then she would just wait to see how they responded. And this was the key part of the interview for her. And if they said, oh, you're right, yeah, hedgehogs are awful, or going to the cinema is a waste of time, well, that's no good. You're just
no
flip-flopping
conviction.
and agreeing. If you argue, well, hedgehogs really matter and the cinema is really important, that's no good, because you're going to be arguing with the donor. What the answer she was looking for, the response she was looking for, was for someone to say, oh, that's really interesting. Why do you not like hedgehogs? Why do you not like the cinema? And then she knew they'd be a good fundraiser, because the best answer is why. Tell me more. I'm curious about that reaction. What
Yeah.
is it about? And then you've got someone who's got the right outlook to be a good fundraiser.
I love that. I absolutely love it. I'm aware of time. The last thing I'd love to talk to you about is you and your team recently launched a fundraising apprenticeship. And a lot of listeners might not be aware that an apprenticeship exists for fundraising. So could you tell us a little bit about it and who it's for, and what are the benefits for both the charity and the fundraiser?
Sure. So the apprenticeship model, I think, was launched in about 2015-16, and it's across all different industries. And what I noticed was that the for-profit sector was a lot quicker to put together apprentices, and as essentially a form of training on the job where nearly all the fees are paid, because big companies, big organizations have to pay an apprenticeship levy. So there's a pot of money waiting there to be used. So if you are, there's not many charities fit this, but if you have a salary bill of 3 million or more a year, you have to pay the apprenticeship levy. But then you can send people on these courses for free.
Right.
But if you're not an apprenticeship levy payer, you still get it for almost free. You only pay 5%. So 95% is covered by government co-investment funding, basically from money that's left over in this apprenticeship levy pot. We launched it this year. The first cohort started. We're now recruiting for the second cohort, and you get 13 months 13 months training, a day a week of working with me and my team. And we do all the things we've been talking about in this call. We show the knowledge, we share the practical insights. We set our students, our apprentices, task of go and speak to your digital people, go and map out your stakeholders, come back next Friday and we'll look at it together. And I really love it. I love teaching on it. It's mostly for people who are quite new to fundraising, maybe up to about a year or so of experience, or it could be their first job in fundraising. And I think that if we can give those people that start, it's a start I wish I'd had, when I was 13, instead of trying to find random books to read in my lunch break, if I could have been on a formal course where you cover all the basics of the different methods of fundraising, the knowledge you need about how it all works, I think it's going to be hopefully a really good contribution to the charity sector. I think it will accelerate their careers. I think if you can start with a year of that early on in your career, you will make director fundraising a lot quicker, because you've got that, and you'll then know where to look for information. You'll know about these different resources, and you'll have a network of other fundraisers to talk to, because the cohort, of course, there's a huge amount of mutual support and aid. So I'm really excited about it. If anyone wants to know more about fundraiser apprenticeship or the MA or the PhD, they can easily find me. The kind of mission of our centre, the Centre for Philanthropy at the University of Kent, is bridging academia and practice. I'm not interested in theoretical abstract study. It's always applied. And the bridge goes in both directions. So sometimes practitioners say we need this course or we need some research on this topic, and sometimes we'll say, hey, we've got some research, you might find it useful. So the bridge goes both ways. But yeah, I think it's, as I say, fundraising is something you do. It's something very real. It affects everybody's lives every day. We can't just be sitting off in a separate room writing about it in some kind of high-minded way that doesn't relate to practice. So yeah, we want to be that bridge.
Absolutely. Beth, I could talk to you all day, and there's hundreds of questions I've got, but I'm going to restrain myself. So thank you so much for joining us on this podcast. One of the things we're doing to thank people that join us on this podcast is we're going to give you a book to thank you. And that book was chosen by the person who was on the previous podcast. What I'd love to know is, what book should we give our next podcast guest? So you get to choose it.
Okay, I love that question. And I think I'm also very happy that I would suggest it to anybody else who's listening who might like to give themselves something else to read. Because it's a book that I couldn't extract from. It didn't lend itself to a 3-page extract. So you kind of need to read the whole thing. And it's called The Art of Asking by Amanda Palmer. And
Okay.
Amanda Palmer is a rock star. She is a kind of creative, artistic woman who was in a band. She was the first she kind of hit people's radars a bit because she crowdfunded the first, I think, $1 million campaign on crowdfunding to fund her tour and her album. So she sees asking as essentially a creative thing that she's done throughout her life. And she actually began as one of those living statues, when people stand like a statue
Okay, yeah.
in Boston in Northeast America. And I, whenever I've walked past those human statues, I'm probably a little bit embarrassed and think, oh, I don't quite know. And isn't that really uncomfortable?
Yeah.
And she writes about it, about being an artist, trying to create something. And if anyone gave her a donation, she'd give them a little flower, and she'd, hand it to them. Anyway, as I say, it doesn't lend itself to describing or explaining succinctly. But if you spend a few hours reading her book, The Art of Asking, and she talks about how she needed to ask and she likes to ask, and it's helped enable her whole career as an artist. And I think any fundraiser will learn a huge amount from reading it, and I think you'll find it very enjoyable as well. So that's the book I would suggest.
Brilliant. I really love that. It sounds slightly, well, not directly, but I'm recently finished I think Lisa Greer, I think Greer's her
Mm,
surname, Philanthropy Revolution. And I
yeah,
loved that because that was someone that was suddenly thrust into wealth.
yeah,
So she tells the whole story around that, which is fascinating, but then became a major donor essentially overnight. So if anyone's not read it, her and her husband were behind the 3D technology that went into cinema to make 3D films possible. And there wasn't much uptake. And then Avatar came out, and
yeah.
suddenly every cinema in the world wanted this 3D technology. And so she describes what it felt like from a human perspective to suddenly be a major donor and see how your relationships change, how charities treat you differently, like what you was talking about
Yeah,
earlier.
yeah.
So yeah, I'd recommend that to
I
anyone.
love that book too. And luckily we could extract from that. So we have got that in the reader. But yeah, what a gift for somebody to sit down and say, hey guys, listen, this is what it's like to be on the receiving end of your asks. And this is when it's good and this is when it's bad. And we can see through, what you're saying and how you're saying it. And this doesn't feel comfortable. But yeah, it's a real gift. And I've got to know Lisa over the years, and and she's just got another book coming out soon, actually. So I'd keep an eye on her, Greer, GRWR. But I just think somebody who remembers what it's like before becoming wealthy and what
Yes.
again wants to help bridge that, can share that experience. Because if you've been wealthy for a long time, or you're born into wealth, you don't know
Yeah.
what it's like to be on the other side. So yeah, I think her book is extremely valuable as well. And it takes time to write a book. So anyone who
Yeah.
bothers to commit that to paper, that's why we need to carve out more time to read. Because as I say, someone spent 3 years writing it. It'll take you a lot less time than that to read it. So why not benefit from what they've got to say?
Yeah, and what's really nice is that one's on Audible. And there's an increasing fundraising and philanthropy section on Audible. So if you prefer to listen to things in your car on the way to work, that's a great way to chew through some key
Less
text.
easy to skim though. I'm afraid I still prefer a book. I don't even do Kindle. I like a real proper book, and I can see how long it is. But each to their own. I've got loads of friends who love Audible. So if that's your thing, then go for it.
Beth, thank you so much, and I hope people watching this will engage with the University Kent Centre in all the different ways that you support us. So thank you for everything you're doing for the
Not
sector.
at all. And listen, let me just say good luck to everybody. If you're somebody who works in fundraisers, if you're thinking of being a fundraiser, if you just started a job in fundraising, you're on a really, really important career path, and you're going to make the world a better place. And good luck to you. And if I can ever be of help, let me know.
So that was our interview with Dr. Beth Breeze. We really hope you enjoyed it and got some useful insights that you can apply to your own fundraising. If you've got any thoughts or any questions at all about the content of this podcast, please do feel free to leave a comment below. And if you're interested in starting your journey in learning more about fundraising, check out the My Fundraising College website, where you can sign up to be part of our first cohort this September 2023. And if you found today's episode helpful, please do like it, please do subscribe to it, and look out for our next episode of the My Fundraising College podcast, which will be coming to you about mid August. Until then, we wish you every success with your fundraising.